Mark and Kevin are both on them.
Hi,
Dr.
were we four?
Fourth or not.
You'd be really good.
Should we get started?
Also, or not you? I'll call the January 12th select board meeting to order at 4:30. Number 2, the sewer master plan workshop.
So, to give a little tiny bit of an introduction, we've been talking recently over the last several months with Weston and Sampson about a variety of sewer planning related items, and we decided many weeks ago, we should do a sewer master plan update. And they are here to review this with you because there are going to be some projects in the nearish future, and we want to spend some time on Somerset. All right, we're doing that, to answer some of the questions that, or issues that the board had when we most recently talked about it. So I would turn it over to you guys to take us through the sewer master plan. I think we had the board last heard about this maybe around 2019-20,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep, so we did the master plan, the sewer master plan in 20, and then in 24, we did a supplement. So we never presented the supplement to you folks, so that's where we'll eventually get to that, and talk to you about that. During this presentation. Okay. So that's just a quick agenda, so we'll do a little plan history.
You want to just introduce your team?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Dan Sheehan with Weston Sampson. Anna Wojcik is our project engineer for Somerset, and she helped write the master plan supplement report. In the back, we have Ken Nichols, our vice president, and Ryan Henley is our project manager on the Somerset project. All right. Oh, yeah, so this is just a brief agenda here. We'll talk about the planning history. Just to remind you folks of everything that's been done. Starting back at the 2004 CWMP. We'll talk about the master plan supplement, do a presentation on that. And then the last one is we'll get to some additional information on Somerset needs area. That's based on the last two select board meetings, where several questions were brought up and raised. So we'll try to answer those questions in this presentation tonight. All right, so just I'll go through some planning history. So dating back in 2004, the town completed the comprehensive wastewater management plan. And on the left-hand side, we have several bullets about the purpose of the report. So basically, it's to come up with some long-term solutions for water quality issues and protection of public health. And several needs areas were developed. And by needs areas, I mean those areas that were recommended based on environmental issues to build sewers, extend the sewer system, because the septic systems are not proper to treat the wastewater for you. So on the map on the right, you'll see the various needs areas highlighted on the original map. So following the comprehensive wastewater management plan, so in 2005, 2007, the treatment plant received an upgrade. You'll see the photos on the right. So that was 2003. And then the one on the left, rather, 2003, on the right is 2011. So 2000, in that upgrade, it was a primary treatment plant. It was upgraded to an advanced treatment plant with a membrane. You'll see in the 2011 photo at the bottom left-hand side of the picture, those are the tanks, the membrane tanks, aeration tanks. That was basically to deal with the nitrogen issues from the needs areas. And then between 2004 and 2014, those are several issues, but items that were done, projects completed by the town. We had, the biggest one up there is the MEP reports. Those looked at all the various nutrients and loadings into the ponds, Hummock Pond, Long Pond, and the waterways. Some TMDLs were established, revised Board of Health septic regulations, and then the capacity for the Surfside treatment plant, which resulted in the upgrade. You'll see up there on the right-hand side. So then, based on the results of the MEP, the town went ahead and did a 2014 update to the CWMP. And there were several modifications made to these areas. So for instance, Hummock North was added as a needs area. Hummock South was added as a needs area, and my comment was added as a needs area. And that's because the MEP identified nutrient loadings to the ponds, Hummock Pond and Myaconic Pond. And then, so then, because we had the additional flows, also the other change, I guess, was Nantucket. So in 2004, the plan was to treat Nantucket wastewater at a third wastewater treatment plant. And in 2014, the town decided to remove the treatment plant out there and bring the flows to the Surfside plant. So Surfside plant required an upgrade for additional flow. Which leads us to our actions. So one of the projects we did was the Nantucket Harbor Shingle Plus project. That was your first CWMP needs area that got sewer extension. I should say first and only, actually, because no other areas have been serviced yet. That was our first large scale project since the late 80s when we did Surfside Road area. Then the bottom left hand side, that was phase one upgrade to the treatment plant. Again, so this was the upgrade based upon the CWMP, where we added all those needs areas into the plant. It got updated for the additional flows. And so then the next planning project was the 2020 sewer master plan. We had presented this to you folks, and the purpose of the master plan was to identify how and where to connect these needs areas into the collection system. Now, that's a very important step because you need to build the downstream system in order to build the remainder of the system. So we looked at how to connect each of these needs areas into the existing collection system, which will lead us to the first project that was done was the Surfside Road area soil improvement project. We have the new pump station that was built that replaced the old system, the old 30-year-old station across the street. And then it was, obviously you can see the size of these pumps. There's a much larger pump station, but it's basically sized to handle Somerset, Hummock North, and Hummock South. And as you had folks over the last couple of weeks, Somerset was the first project to be built, and then we'll follow on with the two Hummocks, North and South. Those flow into Somerset, which then pumps into this pump station, and then to the treatment plant.
Thanks, Dan. So the next action from the sewer master plan was to refine the design that was conceptual in the sewer master plan from 2020. The first needs area that was looked into was the Nantucket and Warren's Landing needs areas. This was a priority due to its proximity to Nantucket Harbor and to Long Pond. So as part of this process, the design of low pressure sewer was verified and some preliminary pipe sizing was completed, as well as looking at different pump station considerations and conveyance options into the existing sewer. And then from all of that refined design, a budgeted cost was developed for this area. So after some public outreach efforts during this reporting process, the town decided to shift focus to another needs area to do a similar analysis, and that was the Somerset needs area. This area was chosen as a priority due to the area being within both the Hummock Pond and Myaconic Pond watersheds, which are both impaired waters, and was determined in the 2014 CWMP update. So back in 2023 was when this was completed. This needs area, as Dan discussed, needs to be constructed before both the Hummock North and Hummock South needs areas. And a budgeted cost was also developed for this needs area at the time. So moving from 2023 into 2024, so when we began discussion of the sewer master plan supplement. So after the individual analysis of Nantucket and Somerset, the town decided to go through that same similar analysis of verifying conceptual design and developing budgeted costs for the remaining needs areas. That includes Hummock North and Hummock South, as well as Shakmo, Maya Comet, and WPZ. And I'll briefly touch on each of those needs areas next. This is a map of the Hummock North needs area. This area is directly adjacent to head of Hummock Pond, and the majority of the area is within the Hummock Pond watershed. It consists of gravity sewer, low pressure sewer, one pump station, and a force main that conveys flow from the entire area into the proposed sewer in Somerset. So Somerset needs to be constructed first, so these flows can be discharged into the existing sewer system and get treated at the Surfside wastewater treatment facility. Something to note for this area, in the bottom of the map, there is low pressure sewer proposed and the future Hummock South force main proposed. Something that's recommended in this report is for those two pipes to go in the ground at the same time, depending on which needs area you construct first, just to save some final paving costs. So next is the Hummock South needs area. This needs area is similar to Hummock North, that it's directly adjacent to Hummock Pond. The majority is in the Hummock Pond watershed, and that's why it was included in the 2014 CWMP and the sewer master plan. It also consists of gravity sewer, low pressure sewer, one pump station, and a force main that discharges into the proposed sewers in Somerset. So Somerset also has to be constructed before this area can be constructed. Something to note on this is there's a lot of dark blue lines on this map. Those show proposed water mains. While we were working on this report, we were in discussions with the Nantucket Water Department, and it was decided for this report to propose water mains on any streets within needs areas that don't currently have water mains to save on possible final paving costs in the future. Next is the Maya Comet needs area. This area was added in the 2014 CWMP due to it being directly adjacent to Maya Comet Pond, another impaired water body. This area consists of primarily gravity sewers, just a few low pressure pieces on Maya Comet Road. So back when the force main was being constructed, it was decided to also construct gravity sewer on South Shore Road. So that used to be included on this map, but now it is existing sewer. There's currently a dry line in the ground, and that was to only pave South Shore Road twice. So that line is ready to take in the sewers from this area. The South Shore Road pump station, which is at the south side of this map, right next to the Surfside wastewater treatment facility, is already in the design phase and is proposed to be installed under a separate project that is going to take in flows from this area. Next is the Shakmo needs area. This area is completely low pressure. It is directly next to Nantucket Harbor and right next to the Nantucket Harbor Schimmel area that was constructed in 2019. So the sewers that are in Pulpus Road that were installed during the sewer project were sized for the Shakmo needs area. So this area doesn't require a pump station or a force main to convey flow into the existing system. The last of the 5 needs areas evaluated as part of this supplement was the Wellhead Protection Zone, WPZ needs area. This needs area is tributary to the town's drinking wells. So originally in the 2014 CWMP update, this needs area was shown to be adequately treated just with on-site wastewater or with a septic management plan. But the CWMP update recommended that if there was ever an issue with nitrogen or other contaminants in drinking water, that this would become a recommended sewer area. So that's why it was shown for conceptual design in both the sewer master plan and then refined in the supplement. This area is also completely low pressure and has 2 discharge points, one in Hinsdale Road and one in Belvedere Farm Road. So building on protecting the drinking water on the island, an additional analysis that was completed as part of the sewer master plan supplement, which wasn't included in the sewer master plan, is the Zone 2 wellhead protection area. So the goal of this analysis was to look at the wellhead protection area, which is outlined in pink on this map. Look at all the parcels within this area, see which parcels are sewered, see which ones aren't sewered, and see what would need to be done to sewer all the parcels in this area to try to eliminate any septic derived nutrients in the drinking water. So throughout this analysis, it was concluded that there are over 700 parcels in this area that are currently fronted by sewer, but they're not paying a sewer bill as of December 2023 when this analysis was conducted. So it was concluded that they are not connected. So this analysis will have to be rerun since this was done in 2023. And then we can look at the different reasons why each parcel is not connected. Then there are also approximately 400 parcels that are not fronted by sewer. Of those 400, there are about 135 that have a different plan for sewer outside the sewer master plan supplement. So we were really looking at about 235 parcels that are currently not fronted by sewer and would require a sewer extension to be connected into sewer. For that sewer extension, we also developed a budgeted cost to see how much it would cost to sewer all the parcels in this area. Really, why sewer this area? It's to protect the island's drinking water from the emerging contaminants, from the rising issue of PFAS, and from all the nitrogen coming from on-site wastewater systems.
Would you like, can we ask questions as you go?
Absolutely.
Or- Okay, and you might have already answered this, but would sewering this, is Surfside sized for this,
Or,
to take this flow?
so,
You're talking about the pink hatch area at the bottom?
Everything in the
The
circle.
surf side, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the area that's in the pink hash at the bottom,
Mhm.
that is not included in the capacity at the plant.
Whatever.
But the other parts are all, we're all part of it,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
It probably says that in that little teeny tiny.
It's really
Yeah,
hard to
really
read.
teeny tiny.
So most of what you've discussed is included in the capacity,
Yes, yeah,
yes,
yeah,
Yeah.
for the force main and for the plant.
yes, yeah.
So sidebar, if this is accurate, so when people who are coming into a sewer district that weren't in a sewer district, but
Yes,
they got in, their flow is not in the capacity the
correct.
capacity
Yeah.
that Surfside could take, so.
Like that parcel on Monahansa.
So I'm just, I think it's just a fact.
Yes.
That parcels like that would be subtracting from the capacity that was supposed to be for.
Correct, yeah. I mean, at some point in time, you're gonna have to upgrade the plant at some point.
Yeah.
If you wanna keep adding sewer systems,
Mhm,
sewer extensions, which, you know, in order to protect your island, you're gonna have to.
yeah, right,
So. We're doing two upgrades right now to the treatment plant, right? So.
Yes.
Wouldn't we be able to design these? I can't even tell which ones they are, these pink ones in here that are not currently included in the capacity of the plant. Is it a permitting issue or why couldn't we include that capacity in the design that we're going on?
You're not really adding capacity to the treatment plant with what you're currently working on.
Okay,
That was already done in the
Okay.
previous one.
okay.
This, I mean, but you've got,
But could we though, is the question.
under this current one, no, that would be, you have to, there's a lot of analysis to be done on resizing things. You may have to add more tankage, which,
Got it.
again, I wouldn't do that until the time came that you needed to. You've got all the different needs areas. I mean, if you're looking at, we've done one needs area so far. You got 5 or 6 more to go. How long will it take before you reach your capacity? At that point, you know, once you get to a certain percentage, I think it's maybe 80% of the flow, then your DP will require you to do a plan to upgrade the plant. So you may not see the flows ever come to fruition on some of the needs areas.
the upgrades that are being done now are not capacity related,
They are capacity related, but treatment plant related, they're all related to phase one of the upgrades. There was stuff in phase one that got kicked out because we didn't have enough funding.
yeah, okay.
And they were based on X amount of buildings in there being built within that time frame
Yes,
going in.
yes,
So if we change any of those, any of the inputs, then that changes the equation.
absolutely, yeah,
Okay,
yes,
so and that's part of what's missed sometimes,
yes.
is that we, you know, if you change an input and say, okay, every lot can have 3 houses now. We can have all this. People don't realize that that's then changing. Maybe it won't last as long. Maybe we're building the new plant earlier, or,
Yeah.
you know, if we take it out, then that capacity is available for somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think that is kind of lost in translation.
I mean, David said it very well at one of the public meetings before you had the last town meeting. every gallon you add that's not accounted for now is that a gallon gets taken away from somewhere else. So eventually you catch up to it and you will eventually have to build a bigger plant if you continue to grow the way you guys are growing. But again, that's a question for the town to decide on zoning and other things like that, if you want to restrict things, but it's kind of a tough.
But it's a hard discussion to have.
Yeah.
Because we kind of fall off the fence one way, we always fall the same direction.
Yeah.
Which is we can add and we can keep doing it, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And I think that we really have to get to the point where we look and say, are we fine? You know, can we continue to do this? You know, in my opinion.
Well, I think let's go through the rest of we start talking about the benefits of sewer, you're gonna realize we really need to do this.
No, I agree we have to do it, but we have to find a way to do it that we can afford to do it.
Yeah.
And minimize the unintended consequences.
Exactly, and not so anyway, keep going.
And so this summary just shows the budgeted cost developed as part of the sewer master supplement for each individual area. So the Nantucket report was done in 2021 and the Somerset in 2023. As part of this report, we brought those costs up to $2024 to be consistent with the rest of the needs areas. And then for consistency in what we've been presenting to you, the Somerset costs are shown from July 2025. Something else to note is, as I discussed with the water mains in all these needs areas, they were proposed in all streets in the needs areas that don't currently have water mains. And the cost for those water mains are included in the total cost. So you see how McSouth is quite large. There are a lot of water mains proposed in that area, and that is where some of that cost comes from. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Kent, who's gonna talk about a funding option that was looked into as part of the sewer master plan supplement.
Do you want to come up to the table so that Al gets you? There's a seat next, well, you
Yeah,
can stay, there's a seat next to you, and there's a
Yeah.
seat here too.
We'll put them up.
And Ryan, you can come up too if you need to, if you're.
So one specific thing we left in the scope when we did the sewer master plan supplement was looking at funding, because funding is always a challenge. And it's been a challenge for wastewater projects across the state forever. And so it's not new just in Nantucket. In point of fact, a program was developed for Cape Cod, intended to include the islands at the time. This goes back about 20 years ago, called the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Board. This was set up through legislation with a special funding source to allow communities to get some relief from the cost of extending sewers to areas that need it. At the time that it was implemented, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard were separated out, even though you were included in the intended areas, you were separated out and not necessarily had joined into the program. But it was always available to the communities to join if you wanted to. The fund basically works this way. There was a rental, a traditional and short-term rentals would be included, but basically a surtax on lodging of 2.75%. This is now in place on all the Cape communities. And this is in fact how a lot of the Cape communities that you've seen doing major wastewater projects are funding a lot of their work. They pay in, this gets collected automatically by the state, this surtax. That creates a fund, which the state then administrates. They use that money to pay down the amount of principal that is owed on the borrowing. In effect, it creates what looks like a 25% grant equivalent for these projects, especially for larger projects. Some of the small projects actually even get a 50% grant equivalent. And this has happened for the beginning of the process over the course of the Cape. So the question came up when we were doing the sewer master plan, should Nantucket join this? And so we did quite a bit of analysis at the time, working through. We talked to the Cape Cod Commission, we worked through your department's legal. Brian obviously did a lot of work on this as well. We turned this each way and did a pretty kind of comprehensive analysis of this thing. We could talk at length about this. In fact, at one point we had generated a multi-page presentation just on this topic, but the upshot is one slide. And the upshot is we did the analysis and the program really doesn't make sense for Nantucket. And the reason the program doesn't make sense for Nantucket is because you folks have a kind of a different ratio of those things. You would put in way more revenue if you had this adopted from these, and the town wouldn't pay that directly. It would come from the people renting in town, but the revenue coming out of Nantucket would be much greater than the amount of money you would then be able to recover through the fund. And so because of that, we said, well, this really kind of doesn't work. So we also looked at a couple of other factors. One is the fund is already struggling because the Cape is spending more money than it can actually generate with this. Very different than what it would look like if Nantucket was in it. If you were in the fund, they'd have more money in the fund and they'd be generating less money out. So if you wanted to rescue the Cape, you might be, looking at this saying, hey, Nantucket should join.
That's
But
why
other
they
than
wanted
that,
us in there, so.
They really did, and so
We
we
did.
looked at it closely, but I think, Brian, we were pretty conclusive that it just didn't make sense.
We were very conclusive because we would have contributed millions and millions of dollars and the equitable distribution was never really defined. And I
Yeah.
think the other
Yeah.
problem that I think Kent and I kind of struggled with is that because we were so much farther ahead of the Cape, in order to get money from it, it had to be a project that would be eligible on the IUP.
Yeah.
And as we continue to progress and as the Cape catches up to us, there's a likelihood that the competitive nature of the IUP could have eliminated some of our projects and therefore we would really not, where we likely would have benefited a little bit more was from prior payments for previously approved project. But we would have been contributing so many more millions of dollars that it would have never made us whole.
Yeah, and I think the analysis we did at the time, and Brian, I'll paraphrase what we did at the time, but I think the analysis we did at the time was over like a 33-year period. If you accelerate, and this would require you to also accelerate building your sewers, like we talked about a project, every 2 years you do a new project, get through all the stuff in your fund. You're nowhere near that pace now, and in fact, as you're seeing, you're struggling with capital funds. So the goal then is to stretch, and it wasn't in there, but even with a compressed schedule, we had a thing that looked like you would give somewhere around $300 million of revenue into the program. And you get somewhere like, well,
200 or something.
I came up with 92, you came up with an accelerated number, even if we accelerated back and got some retroactive funds. But at the end of the day, it was nowhere near equitable. So this kind of went by the wayside, except that we were interested in kind of continuing to track if things changed. Because what we don't want to do is dismiss ideas that help you make sewering cost effective, help you recover costs appropriately. We did come up with the idea that there were some local options that should be discussed. And I do think that this would be reasonable to have on your kind of future radar screen for a discussion with the board. When we get to the point where you really want to talk about local ideas. And there were two things that bubbled up to the top. One is there's an actual law that was passed for local water infrastructure funding that you can set aside real tax fraction and use it specifically for water, wastewater, and stormwater funds. That is already on the books. That can be adopted directly by the town. The other thing we kicked around is you could potentially do something similar to what the Cape and Islands Fund does with a home rule petition that would be specific to Nantucket. But you'd need to do quite a bit of homework in order to do any of these things. So at the end of the day, while there's options here, the thing that we got to do is we pretty quickly got away from the idea that the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund is a solution.
Kent, the WIF, is that what you mean?
Yep.
The other fund,
Yep.
we have talked about that and a couple of towns on the Cape have adopted it. It's a CPC like surcharge
That's
on your
right.
tax bill up to 3%.
Yep.
And the board has talked about it off and on a little bit, but I don't think anybody's jumped at, let's do it.
It's out there,
Yeah.
it's not, it's no new source of funds, it's just getting different funds, it's a different way to collect from the big you already collect from. So it's hard to say it's a new source of funds, right? But it's out there.
There will be no home rule petition for a revenue stream for Nantucket. We've been trying on housing for 15 years.
That's a big
so
challenge.
It
for the
won't
town.
happen, especially since this exists. They'll just say, use this.
Well, the width we asked about an analysis, like what would it be? Because there could be some sense. Because the tax base is skewed the way it's skewed, there may be some sense that it does bring, it does pull up the bottom a bit.
Yeah.
So there, that might be worth looking at, but I agree. I don't think we should be in a home rule and we definitely shouldn't be in this. Funding the Cape.
Got 100 other ways to pound my head against the wall.
So I think, Anna, that was all for this discussion. I think that was all we had for now. We actually designed in a break here because we're gonna jump after this away from history of the sewer project and where we were to some of the questions that came up in the last discussion on Somerset. So we thought this would be a good time to kind of think about what we presented and kind of get back maybe to questions on that. We do have about 15 or so slides on the back end.
Nine or so.
While we're talking about the whole comprehensive plan, I mean, Nantucket voted, we voted down Nantucket a few years ago, right? It was so much
The
this,
split, I think one vote was positive.
It was,
and
yeah.
Rejected at the ballot.
Yeah,
yeah,
but it didn't pass.
Yeah.
It didn't get the required votes.
and as far as I know, the community in Nantucket is still well opposed to what they perceive to be the negative impacts on development should they be sewered. And then we also have issues around the risk to the infrastructure over time.
Yeah, and Nantucket, I think now has some different conditions. For one thing, I think the cost of the project at that time, 2016-ish, was not, it was higher than it ended up ultimately.
Yep.
Being reviewed. And the land where we were gonna put the treatment plant is now not owned by us. So there's that.
Well, that went out the window in 2014. The plan based on going forward was to pump that flow to Surfside.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
that plan,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Um,
So David put in a connection and the new force main
mhm.
for Nantucket eventually to tie into that force main and the older 2008 vintage force main. So it could go to both force mains and be pumped all the way to Surfside directly.
I'm not sure if we ever did a full-on analysis of what sort of regulations would, or zoning or health department be put into place to limit development, and bedrooms and things. The Board of Health did some sort of regulation about square footage of
They did some, and then the Nantucket,
bedrooms.
association themselves had the analysis done a couple summers ago. And it was, substantially different. They had it done and it was, a substantial impact, which is why they're sort of so much against it. They were being told that, oh, no, we've made the zoning changes and everything's fine. And then they actually had another group do the numbers with.
Land and Water Council.
Yeah, Land and Water, and then someone else did the numbers for them and said, no, it isn't done. Here's what will happen. And yeah, so that's all right. So anyway, that all that has happened, so they are hesitant. The other thing I will say, that I don't think we appreciated as much as we do now, is coastal resiliency and the erosion rate that's going there.
Mhm.
When we first were talking about this, I don't think anyone, knew it was at quite the level that it's turning out to be. In Nantucket especially.
One of the things that we looked at, one of the plans we got to was, we had to raise almost quarter or half of Nantucket Road to bring it up so that it wouldn't flood, and that was gonna put approximately $50 million on top of the sewer project. From out by Millie's all the way in past the landfill.
So-
Prevent the flooding.
So are we gonna answer the hard question? I mean, the way we're proceeding, we're leaving Nantucket behind. Is that a decision? Have we made that decision as a community to not move the Nantucket
I
forward?
think Jeff had done a presentation, I believe it was Jeff, back that said that the water quality in Nantucket Harbor had actually improved on its own because of a lot of the IA systems that had been
Mhm.
installed. And it showed enough of an improvement that we kind of just moved Madigan down the list. We didn't vote against it, we just moved it down the list.
Malcolm has his hand up. Malcolm?
Yeah, actually, I'm a little slow. I think most of it is said about Nantucket. I think it's time to take a breath on Nantucket, but there needs to be some more analysis done. Has to be analysis done of all the zoning when we put sewer in, what happens, how we can prevent further development. But Matt summarized it beautifully.
If I'm right, there is an intersection between zoning and health regulations, right? The thing that prevents build out in the Somerset area now is it's a bedroom count related to septic. There's a maximum number of bedrooms when you're on septic. When sewer goes in, if sewer goes in, there will be the potential for not only for all of the secondaries and tertiaries and more bedrooms, right? So it's not really, can we address that? It's a health code, it's a health thing, but can we curb it through zoning is the question that I've had on my mind for a couple of years. Like, how do we do that? If the goal is to say, we're gonna do sewer for the health of our environment, but we don't want all of the corresponding additional bedrooms that'll be permissible under the current set of rules, what is the mechanism? Are there mechanisms we could use to make sure that doesn't happen before we put in the sewer? Because I feel like we're being given a false choice, which is sewer for the environment. But Matt, you bring this up all the time. What is the environmental impact of more impervious surfaces, more roofs, more more intensive use, et cetera, in these areas that we're protecting? And I don't know how we answer that question, because it's a marriage of the sewer regs and septic regs with zoning may be the only way to actually limit what could be done once the permission is granted when you're on sewer. Just, are you guys
Yeah,
understanding
you
what I'm saying?
basically have to alter like the ground cover allowance.
Yeah.
And the, you would probably want to talk about things that actually don't count towards ground cover that are impervious. Like
Yeah.
you'd have to put something into zoning like they do with certain commercial properties where you have to have a certain amount of green space that's not paved over, that's not built, that's not structure, to address those kind of issues.
The Coastal Resiliency Committee's been, there's best practices sort of in these at-risk areas that they've been attempting to discuss and have, and bring to the forefront, with planning. But what planning is doing right now, and they're pretty close now, is they're putting the stuff that the state wants done for this round through first. So we'll comply with the state, and then the discussions of what else can you do is next, because it may be that some of these areas can take, take some more density, et cetera, but there are others that we think are okay now, where the water is going to expand, the wetlands are gonna wanna expand, the water table is gonna rise, so you have to take those into consideration as you're crafting this. Because you can't treat them as they're all the same and it's gonna be no problem, because they're not the same, and the water's gonna come up and it's gonna rise. And so it might be expanding overlays or exist. It might be just expanding the overlays or looking at the overlays, their projections in 5 or 10, 20 years. I don't know, but that's the level of detail I think needs to get into to do this.
Madam Chair, if Coastal Resiliency Group is looking at it and planning grouping, looking at it, we've talked about this. Should we be getting a group together to coordinate all that? Because we've talked about this whole issue for 3 years that I know, and we've never really done much about it. Do we need another working group? Do we need something instead of just talking about it?
Matt and Tracy talked about something at one of the last meetings, which was well over my head. The way that area was originally zoned, that it was already limited on growth. You talked, so I didn't understand me just saying.
So there were deed restrictions, 30-year deed restrictions in a lot of those developments in that area that have expired.
Somerset?
Yeah,
Mhm.
so there are neighborhood development plans that didn't allow second dwellings and didn't allow other things, but those are all gone.
He was talking way
They
over.
expired.
And that's something that planning actually did to address it in Pine Valley.
Yeah.
They created a new zone that's like, is it R R10
limited or
L
something,
or
yeah.
something that kept some of those things in place and put the 2A.
And the state went and added a by right
Right, yeah.
house.
Erica?
Can I just ask a question of you all? In the areas that you're looking at for potential sewering in the future, what if you are looking at an area where the residents don't want sewer? I'm thinking of like my neighborhood, which is the Skyline neighborhood. They're all big lots, minimum 2 acre lot size. We just recently had town water installed within the last 5 years. And everybody's on a septic system. And it keeps the potential for build out small. Which I think everybody in the neighborhood really likes. So how do you address that when you've got a neighborhood that might push back?
So that's the burning question, Erica, is how do you get people to agree to they don't have the right to build it now, so they don't really have it. So how do you have the conversation that says we're going to prevent you from getting that ability, well, don't want to call it right, before the sewer goes in. So we're doing both the right thing for the environment and and in some arbitrary way saying we're not going to let it just explode out to the maximum once the sewer goes in.
Yeah.
And I don't,
I think you get it through area planning processes. You get it through
yeah,
a 1 or 2 year process where interacting with all the neighbors and
yeah, we
and
can
going-
test it in Somerset actually.
Yeah.
And see what the, the neighborhood wants, because fundamentally, there's such great value in building more on Nantucket in terms of personal wealth. That, you may live in a neighborhood where people are willing to forego that, but I'm willing to bet that's gonna be a harder sell for some people. So how do we create a narrative and a persuasive argument that, you currently can do this under the laws, if you get sewer, you can do this. How about we meet in the middle somewhere? I think is where in my mind, that's kind of where we have to go is because the alternative is you may be required to put in an IA system. And do you want to spend 80 grand? If that's the alternative, right?
And
I don't know.
in my neighborhood, we're low too, and so we're already constrained by the zoning. I mean, the build out
Yeah.
percentage is so much smaller, so
But I think it's having a
just a question.
narrative that explains like choice A, choice B, choice C, right?
But those are also the areas that when we were originally doing this, that we knew a regular septic system was gonna be fine on a 2 acre lot. And a regular system used normally was gonna, and taken care of was gonna be fine. Now the water might not be, and we need to bring water everywhere, but the question really, but when you start adding more of everything, it might not be. And I think that's what we're struggling with.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions? Before we move on?
I just, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I just have kind of one point. I was listening to the planning board meeting on the way here and it sounds like we all are gonna get a letter about some sort of potential suggested joint meeting on the suggested Board of Health regs and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe if that is a thing, we could combine the whole conversation. Just a thought that's where I think they were making a motion when I was signing off, so.
Joint meeting with planning board and board of health.
Just to get all the boards on the same page, kind of suggestion. I didn't hear exact suggestion, but I would imagine planning, BOH, SB.
Mhm.
I don't know.
That it is integrated, that
Yes.
how we move this forward
Exactly.
has to be integrated.
Right.
If we're
I
gonna-
would strongly recommend we do that. We write a letter to them and suggest it. If they don't write a letter to us, suggest it, whatever.
Just move on?
Yeah.
So as Ken touched upon earlier, we wanted to circle back on the Somerset Needs Area Sewer Extension Project. Kind of just touch upon some of the questions and comments that have come up over the past couple select board meetings. I don't want to get into project design specifics, but Anna covered a description of this needs area pretty well previously. But we'll talk about some of the assembled additional information. So I think Dan and Anna did a pretty good job summarizing some of the previous sewer planning efforts for the town, but I believe pretty much the results of those sewer planning efforts have all corroborated the need for sewers in response to some of the environmental impacts that have been identified in these areas. And these are specific to Nantucket's regional environmental impacts similar to Cape Cod. Dan touched upon some of the previous projects that have been done. The Schimmel project was the first sewer extension project since the 80s. And then, the subsequent projects, the C Street pump station, which actually sets up some of the infrastructure necessary for the next needs areas to be implemented into the sewer system. So the Somerset needs area lies between the Myakama watershed and Myakama Pond watershed and the Hummock Pond watershed. And again, CWMP finds that providing sewers to these areas are, the most effective efforts to manage nutrients in the area as documented in the needs areas. So really, what are the environmental benefits of the sewers? As I mentioned before, the Somerset project area lies between the Hummock Pond watershed and the Myakama Pond watershed. And really, the MEP monitoring shows that, nutrient-driven habitat degradation, really coming from a lot of the septic systems in the area. It's the primary source of the nutrients to these ponds. And as you can see in these pictures, the Hummock Pond and Myakama Pond, this is just a few pictures of eutrophication algae in the area, and other items that have been identified are harmful algal blooms, and turbidity and oxygen depletion. And really providing sewers to the needs areas will eliminate these septic derived nutrient inputs throughout the areas. One big thing to consider is it also removes any PFAS, pharmaceuticals, other emerging contaminants that are identified in septic systems. And really improve the water quality from these areas, reducing all the degradation of these ponds. So one question that had been brought up in one of the previous meetings was the need for septic systems in the area and what type of septic system was necessary. Specifically, the need for a conventional system and a innovative advanced system. Portions of the Somerset project area have been identified as nitrogen sensitive within the Hummock Pond watershed. But the remainder of the Somerset needs area has not been identified yet with as nitrogen sensitive. In discussions with the Board of Health, we kind of did some research to kind of determine what cost would be for these types of systems. And the Board of Health and Wanacoma Water, when Mark Willett had kind of identified some average costs of $50,000 to $60,000 for a conventional system, and $80,000 to $100,000 for a IA system. So one option, so if you want to click next, the Bartlett Road pump station site currently has a septic system that's in failure. I know people have brought up what we can do to utilize that site in the time being. Currently, there's limited space at that site, and it prevents simultaneous installation of a septic system as well as the pump station there. Pump station site has to go on top of where the septic system is now. Any new septic system that gets installed at that site would essentially need to be removed to add when the pump station goes to get constructed. And there would be a temporary loss of wastewater service that would occur during construction. Another topic that has been brought up is the potential to split the Somerset project between phases. Looking at it, the logical approach to this would be to split it between two different phases. phase one would essentially consist of construction of a pump station, as well as of the gravity sewers and force mains along Somerset, Bartlett, and Raceway. I essentially where all of the roadway improvements are gonna go, the stormwater improvements, and where the force mains are gonna go. And then phase two would essentially involve sewer extensions of the remaining streets in the Somerset area. Now, while this sounds like a good idea, it really isn't recommended. We've touched upon the SRF considerations in the past. Really, the uncertainty with statewide SRF funding as you move forward, with delays of the project. But really anticipated costs and timing delays are pretty big here. You're gonna lose some, loss of the efficiency of putting this project out as one single project. You're gonna risk, running multiple construction mobilizations, procurement cycles. And really, cost variability due to material prices and labor later on, down the road. And it really just extends out the construction process. You're gonna continue to just have construction seasons go on and on and on. I'll pass this over to Ken to talk about some of the project funding.
So this is a couple of slides you actually saw, and I think the last select board meeting, we discussed the options of recovering costs from the site. This is this question of, do you do betterments? How do you get money back? We introduced the history of the last project that you did, which is the Shimmer project, where the intent of the select board and the finance committee was to do betterments for that project. Town meeting then subsequently made a decision on its own to reject the thought of betterments and to take that off the table. And so instead of betterments, what was done at the end of the Schimmel and Plus project was you basically assessed what we ended up doing, designing a new sewer capacity fee. It was a fee that was made to take the place of the old capacity utilization fee and sewer impact fee.
Privilege.
Sewer privilege fee, sorry. And your new sewer capacity fee was basically assessed to all the properties out there. In the end, it recovered something on the order of an equivalent of what would have been about 15% of the project costs from those. Now, as Brian rightly pointed out at the last meeting, this fee is a kind of a one catch-all fee right now for you, which is a sewer capacity fee. It's technically intended to pay for downstream improvements. So it's not directly one-to-one equivalent to a betterment, but it is a way that you would get revenue from an area that you sewer directly from the connected properties. So in essence, it looks like other fee systems. It's a fee that would be paid directly by the property served. If they don't connect, they wouldn't be paying these fees. So it is of interest to us.
How flexible is it? For amount, like you got 15 here?
It's pretty fixed right now. It's been on your books, David, since 2020. I think we had it. If you go on the website that talks about your sewer rates on David's website, there's a table in there that lets you calculate it directly.
Has it increased from 2020 till now? No.
It has not yet, but we recommend.
Yeah, it sure is a little bit every year. Yeah. Okay.
So, in the end, what we talked about was, I would never rule out, many communities doing sewers right now are still doing betterments. What we did talk about was, you've got some options right now. If you didn't do a betterment, if you went the way you did in Shimo, you could do the sewer capacity fee. If you do that, we strongly recommend you increment that. Right now, your fee not only is a little outdated, as you point out, Matt, but it also is way behind the curve of what actual wastewater costs, the value of wastewater for a property. Whether it be a new property or an existing property, if you had to replace your septic system, you'd be paying way over that amount. So that's certainly a factor. You certainly could keep the sewer capacity fee and do betterments. Or you could do just betterments. There was talk about waiving those fees if you just did betterments and having a policy where if you charge betterments, you could waive those fees. One of the nice things about the fee that we designed for you is like a betterment. It does allow apportionment for properties over time. So you've got some significant benefits to the property owners that get charged that fee. So that even at a higher number, and it's not very high right now, and we'll look at some of the numbers later, but even at a higher number, you've got the ability to pay that over time at a reduced interest rate, which is a really nice feature and isn't necessarily available to folks if, say, you had to do your own septic system. You wouldn't have anywhere near those benefits. Not only would you pay more money, but you'd have less beneficial funding, financing options there, so.
Can I ask? a question?
Yeah.
And this would be more of a question for Brian. Is there ability to create a program where you, waive or reduce the fee for, deed restricted? We're doing it now, right? For deed
We have
restricted
a
housing.
policy on that, ready for
And it would apply to them.
betterments,
Could we apply to them?
has to work.
The policy doesn't apply to betterment,
No,
betterment.
Really not.
And then generally, you can't.
It's your sewer permit connection fee or your sewer capacity. That's it.
Yeah.
Cause those are the only two things that we have on the books. that-
So staying with the capacity, staying with the current thing gives us more flexibility to incentivize your own restrictions and affordable housing.
And you avoid the betterment vote. You
Yeah.
avoid the whole discussion of the vote and you adjust it based on the market. We are it costs 2 to 3 times as much to do a septic as it does on the Cape. You know, it's 2 to 3 times as much as it, here. So, you get these guys come over and quote, oh, septics are this much, and then when, you do the work, they're not, they're, 2 or 3 times that.
Yeah.
So,
I think even if we proceeded with betterments. And you continued with the deed restricted policy the way it is. The betterment for the deed restricted house, because it's most likely only gonna get one sewer unit equivalent, right? Is gonna be, and at the interest rate, which can be up to 2% more than the interest rate that we're charged on the financing. It's still gonna be significantly cheaper than the cost of the septic system, no question. Even if you waived only the privilege fee or capacity fee, excuse me, and they still had to pay the betterment, I think it's still gonna work out, because you can apportion it over 20 years on your tax bill too.
Yeah.
And I think it would be far less than they would pay for a septic system installation.
Yeah, unless they
say-
have one that's new. Right?
That would be the only scenario that it wouldn't be, but yes, I agree with you.
I would say the only time that betterments get tricky is there are communities who have sought to recover 100% of the cost of projects with betterments. And it gets really tricky because the laws are very clear that you can't collect more than the actual project cost. So if you basically set a betterment 100% and then you have somebody develop a property that you didn't anticipate and charge them a betterment, you now can't collect any more money from that property because you charged 100%. And communities have actually we've had this happen in communities where they got a little too aggressive with setting the betterment program. Then they get into this problem. You either have to assess nothing to that next property, which is completely unfair, or when you assess that property, you gotta start talking about returning funds. So we're very careful when we do these, that we look at the legal aspects of this. And that's why when we redid the sewer capacity fee, we spent time with John Giorgio and your legal counsel to make sure that this all kind of works. Brian spent quite a bit of personal time. Everybody kind of took a lot of time to kind of look at this thing, and it does make sense. The one piece of it that kind of is the outdated piece is going back to Matt, what you were saying is that number we kind of set almost basically, it was set at the time just to avoid controversy. So it didn't look like you were gouging and piling onto the people in the area you were sewering. Or it also didn't want to look like you were kind of countering the will of town meeting, because that was very clear that you weren't going to do betterments. So we purposely set it to be the equivalent of what at the time was your capacity utilization. So this $20.32 number was equivalent to that. The problem is, we think that number dates back to like 2008, so it's even worse. It's been on the books way too long. And so the real value might be something significant. We just incremented that cost up just for that period from 2008 till now. We suggest it goes up to at least 40. We threw out some numbers. What would those fees be for typical properties if it was 40, maybe 50, maybe 60? I would say I've got communities that look at these types of fees that it's around 100. And if you were trying to recover a larger fraction of the cost of this, you could probably justify it being much more. But if you look right now, if you go onto the website for your sewer fees that David maintains, a 1 to 3 bedroom home pays essentially 3 bedrooms worth at that rate, which is about $6,700. We think it's completely reasonable for that fee to be $13,000, $16,000, $19,000 for that. It gets incremented up when you have a larger home with more bedrooms, using Title V calculations to basically multiply by that dollar per gallon. there's a lot of flexibility in setting these fees and adjusting these fees in the future, and we can provide some pretty sound basis for doing this. We do think this offers you a very good option to address the issue of trying to find a way to make sure that the folks who are served directly by the project pay. And not just the initial folks, but as new development occurs, that there's at least a way to recover, continue to recover some of that cost that you have as additional properties get built or even improved. And your fee system right now allows you to charge this fee as properties are improved as well, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, I think the only thing we'd ever have to think about is how we would frame it, because of the way we had framed it before. I think, which is what you and I kind of talked a little bit about, Kent, because it was framed as being used or anticipated to fund capacity at the plant or upgrades, right? So if we increase it and we do that, then we just have to think about how we're going to message that to everybody, because in effect, it does become a betterment without being a betterment almost, right? So,
Yeah.
but it could be a way to not add multiple fees to everybody as well.
That's right. Well, and there is a little history to that too, Brian, because, and it goes back to one of the early questions that came up about capacity of the plant. One of the reasons, as a result of the 2004 planning that you did, that you expanded the plant, was to have capacity to serve these needs areas. It wasn't to give you a big pool of capacity to deal with development as it happens over time and never do the needs areas. The intent, and this is the hard part about planning and developing a sewer program, is you can't do it quickly, but when you don't do it quickly, so many things change over time. So you're kind of a victim of the fact that the intent was, we built X amount of capacity, that X amount of capacity gets used by these projects that are necessary environmentally. Once you build all those projects up and use that capacity, now you don't have the problem of, I've got a bunch of people coming in from the fringe perimeter that want to build developments that I didn't really want to sewer. If you had already done all the regular areas, you might not have capacity, you might be able to say no. But when you don't have the capability to say no, now you're kind of in this thing, you've got to serve first come, first serve. So one of the ideas, Brian, that kind of factors into this discussion a little bit is, when you're serving a needs area that the town intended to provide this, and you actually built, you spent the money originally on the plant capacity for these areas. There is an idea that you would want to treat them differently than, say, somebody who was coming in from the side that was never in the planning. And so there is a little bit of room to kind of change, as you said, we got to work that interpretation, but there's a little bit of room to change that interpretation.
No,
No, I was just gonna say, I believe there's a Board of Health regulation where if you have to put in an IA system and the next year's sewer comes along, you're not forced to hook up right away. So you don't get hit twice with a large fee. There is a grandfathered time.
I think it's 15 years.
Yeah, and that's the rational discussion about it. Is that because if we use the capacity fee, if we increase it and use that to pay for a portion of the project cost, if people are delayed in actually connecting, the capacity fee doesn't get charged until they actually connect. In theory, a betterment is charged when the project is completed and you start collecting. So these are some of the things that as we go through the policy discussions, we have to understand and navigate, because it could delay substantially the time for people to be paying back, which, depending on how it was allocated, would fall to someone else to pay until we had a full collection or a full connection now.
Under the state law of abetments, when you defer a betterment, you can defer it for time, but interest accrues through that whole time. So you can't defer it interest free. That's just the way the state laws are written. So you do have limitations that actually work well.
Done?
Yeah.
To me, as I look at these numbers, I'm like, for me to pay 13 to 19,000 or whatever now, it's almost like I'm buying this instead of, whenever my septic fails, having the uncertainty of that cost. It creates, there's a certainty to my having my sewer dealt with for this dollar amount.
And if you looked at the numbers that Ryan presented on the septic systems, I mean, there's a pretty clear differential. And that's what, I mean, like, when I say it's an abstraction to use the numbers the way we do it, but it's important in the industry. We use this method of using gallons per day and then basing it on Title V. This gives us a chance to kind of level up numbers all the way. But if you go back and think about what we were talking about is say $60,000 for a 3-bedroom home Title V system, conventional. That's $200 per gallon per day.
Yeah.
For your own lot. And that financing, the eligibility to get that money is all on the individual home. One of the things that we do offer on either a betterment or Brian, even the sewer capacity fee is the town basically finances it for.
Credit finance.
There's no credit check. It's like, it is leaned against the property.
Very favorable rates.
Because, so the town knows it, but it does that, and then the other thing, Brian, you and I were talking about one day was, it also doesn't affect your credit rate, it's debt that doesn't hit your credit rate, it's separate, it's completely separate for the town. So there are certain other advantages that stack to those when you're talking about how it advances, but in no instance are we talking about the nature of the cost even being as much, even at the higher ends of these. The nature of that cost is not such. I mean, there are believe me, I have a community right now, we're looking at having $100 per gallon per day fee. And their costs typically wouldn't be as high as Nantucket's cost for septic systems because they're not on that. So you do have to think about and measure what these fees really mean and where they would be. The main message we're trying to give you for tonight isn't what they should be. It's that you have flexibility within a fee system that if you feel like betterments are the way you want to go, you at least have flexibility to compare to betterments some other option. And that's all we're trying to get you to is there's a lot of room here to do things, to do the extra research and the extra work, as Brian says, to think about things, what it logically means, to make it fair, but to also continue to also still make it advantageous to the folks that are being served such that, hey, by giving you sewers at a time that may be inconvenient for you, or as Erica pointed out for her neighborhood, may not even feel like what you want to do right now, in order to solve an environmental problem, we're recognizing that, and in return, you're going to get a little extra help from the town in kind of the way the thing fits together. That preserves that intent, that the spirit of when your town meeting voted to kind of say, hey, let's not do the betterments. It preserves the intent somewhat, but it leaves you the flexibility to still do some better work financially. That's all we're trying to lay the ground.
Just a general question, could we tier these further? Could we say, 1,000 square foot, 2-bedroom is $60 and a 5,000 5-bedroom is 4 times that? Like, does it have to double does it have to be based on the Title V per square foot? Because a lot of these houses say that have so many bedrooms, but then they've got a bunk room and they've got this and they've got that. Is there a way, can we make those changes ourselves through this, through a board of selectmen vote?
The tests that you have to do on these fees are tricky. This is why I mentioned we worked with John Giorgio and your legal folks when we originally did this. When you do betterments, the laws are very specific. They have to be equivalent to certain factors. You have to come up with a method. You have certain flexibilities in that matter. It's not absolute. You do have some flexibilities, but what you can't do is create a leverage system. And what you're talking about is generally not the way you approach these.
Well, I'm not talking about the betterments. I understand there's like
Even
few
if-
betterments,
right.
but if we do, how much flexibility do we have on this? If we wanted to tier them and make a larger, bigger, or renovated, more expensive than, a small house that's sitting there.
You have some flexibility locally, but what you have to do is every time you look at one of those things, you have to look at the underlying legal basis for doing that. And what I would say is, and this is from experience of dealing with the legal firms and doing these fees, the more you try to leverage that, the less likely it is to withstand scrutiny at the legal level. And so your legal folks usually come back and say, it's probably not worth doing. The first time someone challenges it, you're gonna lose. The tried and true method is to have it scaled directly to use, the way this is, and make it go.
Can
Now,
it
I
be a
will-
square feet instead of bedroom?
You can come up with some other methods. There are communities that come up with other methods, but what I will offer you is this. Even though there are certain factors that come into play, a 3-bedroom home that has someone living in it year round generally contributes a certain amount of wastewater. It's not as much as the Title V system is designed. In fact, that's usually about 2 times what it really contributes on an average basis, just by the factors that we put into design systems. A 6-bedroom, a 9-bedroom, a 12-bedroom home generally doesn't always contribute. A lot of times those higher numbers of excess bedrooms, they get used sporadically, right? So they have high peaks, but they don't average out over that for capacity wise.
Especially seasonally.
Yeah, see, and seasonal is a huge thing, and a lot
Yeah.
of those bigger properties aren't year round, they're not filled. Whereas a 3-bedroom home that a family lives in gets used year round. So in a way, Matt, these already kind of scale for themselves.
Well, I would make the other argument though, is on those is they're, you know, the bugs aren't working, they get going, they just start working. They fill it up on the 4th of July, they fill it up in August, and they leave. That's when the most damage is done. That's when the most nitrogen is pouring into the ponds and everything else. And so you've got, and that's when like, if you look at the usage patterns, you know, it's a lot of the houses that we're talking about are used very, you know, very intensely for a short period of time.
That's right.
And so that, you know, so we have to sort of, if we want to be fair about it, you know, someone living in their house and going to work every day and et cetera, you know, with their 2 kids, it's a different use than some of what's happening here.
There are some flexibilities built in and they're worth exploring. I would offer you one thing we did do when we set the sewer capacity fee originally, because we had some good discussions about these types of things, is we did find that there was a concern with properties that had a disproportionate number of bathrooms. And what we did is we adjusted that fee system, which is a little different than the standard approach, such that if you have bathrooms in excess of the number of bedrooms, if you have a house with 5 bedrooms, but 12 bathrooms, we have a leveraging built into your fee system that you'll charge them more. And it's essentially every bathroom in excess of the number of bedrooms counts as like half an additional bedroom. And I think that worked out really well. It was that same thought process trying to get to, Matt, is that flexibility. We're trying to think that through and make sure it's in there. Really.
I think we could expand the bedroom. We could break this out a little further. I mean, I think under a betterment, you could assess the betterment based on frontage of the property or some combination thereof. But I think when we went around with this on the sewer, on the capacity fee, I think the tried and true methodology that everybody understands is based on the Title V calculation of 110 gallons per day per bedroom. I just think it makes it easier to explain, and I mean, it applies proportionally regardless of how much area you have in your house based on assumed utilization. I think is the best way. I think is the way we should continue, but maybe we do something like we did with the sewer rate, Matt, where we have, you know, we have more spread to it so that you capture some of what you're talking about.
Either that or the other option, the other possibility, well, the other thing that's happening is some of the places we're talking about are not just a house, they're an event center now. And so if that's the case, you know, and they've got 12 bathrooms and half of them are being used all night, it is a completely different animal. And that is happening. And so in some ways that's being encouraged with positions that we are taking, you know, as a community. And so I think we have to at least acknowledge those and walk and think through those as we do these, because, you know, anyway.
One thing that you brought up the square foot thing, we had briefly talked about it. We have seen homes that have come in for a permit for modification, raised their house and added 5 bedrooms in the basement. But the square footage is based on ground cover, it doesn't. There was no other way, so one of the things that we did with regulations years ago, modification fee, which has been extremely helpful on getting some of the costs back. Where we go by is the flow based on the 110 gallons, so the square feet thing didn't work at the time, but everything, now you have houses with tunnels going from the house to the cottage and stuff like that, so. It doesn't count as ground cover.
You're gonna have a tunnel fee?
There's no ground cover, so that's, you don't get to count the square footage.
No. Oh my God. I have one other question on a slide earlier, if that's okay. It was a couple back, you talked about the advantages of septic system. And you have the picture with the ponds with the green stuff in them. And what, yeah, here we go, environmental benefits. Are there any studies that talk about, you know, the environmental benefits we know, it takes it away, but then we've added more ground cover, we've added more roofs, we've added more driveways, there's more cars parked there, et cetera. Are there any studies that look, there's more lawns potentially with that going in? Does anyone look at, any studies that look at that and say, here's, we're taking these inputs out, these inputs are going away, but these other inputs are now increased? Has anyone done that kind of analysis?
They do contribute, and there's been a lot of looking at that.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, and Massachusetts is in, I work on the National Water Environment Committee. I spent a lot of my time working at the national level. And Cape Cod is always talked about nationally because it's a very unique situation in the country. There's some parts of Chesapeake Bay that are similar, but for the most part, the nutrient issue on Cape Cod has been very unique. It's the reason that Cape Cod took like 50+ years to address some of the wastewater issues, because there's been this churning discussion. It can't really be. One of the reasons the Mass Estuaries Program was done was to study those ponds, look at the inputs. Unfortunately, the answer that comes back over and over again, that's been reinforced in the 208 study, is the real nutrient load that you can control is septic. It just, every time people didn't want that answer and they went back and looked, the science looked back at it and said, no, the nutrient load, we can't control with septic. It's just like all those other things have effect. There's a lot of things that happen. One of the things that's really bad is, surface applied fertilizers that then wash off into things. Communities adopting fertilizer restrictions are great, and there's a lot of communities being really forethought. I myself live on a property that's directly abutting a lake. I don't use certain types of fertilizer. I don't use any granular fertilizer. I don't use any broadly applied fertilizers because I don't want my lake to be green just because I want my grass to be. I'd rather have my grass to be a little funky and have my lake be beautiful and clear. People have different choices they want to make about the place they live and how they want to impact their water. So communities are doing those things. They've really advanced their nice thought processes and they're worth discussion. But there is all the studies that have been done, particularly the Mass Estuaries Program, that all the work has kind of come back to the load from septic systems is the
worst
biggest
input.
part of it.
It's not the geese.
And even with and we've done this leveraging, even with a very highly advanced septic system, you could put those IA systems in everywhere. And in fact, the state is now mandating them in areas impacted by nitrogen, that if communities choose to do nothing, when you have ponds that are turning green, the state already told you, part of the future for you is they are already considering declaring you a nitrogen sensitive area. And when they do that, they're gonna come in and say, okay, everyone tributary to this pond, even if you're a little, old couple that can't afford anything on a fixed income and you have no problem with your septic system today, you're gonna have 5 years to replace that with a new high-end septic system. And you will not have any choice because we've declared you a nitrogen sensitive area and there's no recourse from that. The only way you can get around that is if the town steps in and says, well, we have another plan, we'll do a watershed management plan. We'll extend sewers and this is our schedule and this is how we're gonna go about it. And then you have to demonstrate you're gonna keep going through that. So while there are options, really taking out, when you have a real significant water quality impact like these, the decision has been, you gotta take out the septic. And even with high-end septic systems, yeah, that might work. We talked a little bit about the Shakamo area. The town has already kind of said, hey, let's look at, and we keep going on areas like Shakamo, because it's kind of spread out, it's diffuse. You talked a little bit about Nantucket. For now, let's, as David mentioned, let's kind of see, and Nantucket kind of keep going in the right direction a little bit. Let's reduce our focus. But at the end of the day, to get the heavy loads out, you've got to get the septic system out of the way. And it's just been that consistent answer place after place. And that's why you saw decades of stagnation on the Cape with this. And now all of a sudden in the past decade, the Cape has exploded with the number because they finally did the last of the studies and came to this, kept coming back to the same conclusion. He said, okay, the 208 study proves this all out. It just has to happen.
Well, and then the state brought the hammer down.
And they brought the reinforcement back on the back end just to make sure it was going to happen, right? But preferably you don't want to be a community that does stuff because you have to do it. You set the motion in place, and this is why we went back to 2004. You've been talking about water quality in Nantucket for much longer than that. I mean, my company's been around since 1899, I think, Dan, was our founding. I had drawings of work at your wastewater plant on Nantucket from 1905. So you've been doing wastewater treatment kind of thought process for 150, 200 years. It's always been a thing, but going back to 2004 is when you kind of knew, you set the die, you said, we know we've got to do these things. And now the only challenge is the exact thing you're struggling with, which is there's so many competing factors, there's so many complexities. How do you do it and when is the right thing to do it? But what it does, it drags the time out, but it doesn't change the need. And that's the hard part, still, right?
So interesting.
One other question, if no one else does. How is the Cape having issues with pools and how are they dealing with it? As opposed to, as compared to us? Pools have become a huge thing on Nantucket and so what's the impacts and what are they?
I've seen it come up in small area by area discussions. I think we heard a lot about it when we were kind of trying to actively move towards Nantucket. And Matt, I think a lot, maybe that's even where some of your recollection is too for this, but as we were getting close to kind of going, should we go back to Nantucket again? Because Matt, it was close when they voted it. It was not way off and, there was some thought there. And the more we talked about the complexities there, that was one of the issues certainly that was the concern about what the aesthetics of the area would be. I don't really know, Matt, that it was a concern about, what happens with swimming pools from an environmental standpoint so much.
I'm asking about from environmental, my understanding, we sort of, I got interested in this when I had my hips replaced about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had time on my hands, I was sitting and reading about it. And I thought saltwater pools were a good thing. Like, oh, it's great, saltwater, and come to find out, it was, it was creating forever chemicals.
Right.
So places that have strict limits on, these types of things, inputs, they will say that you can't pump those have to go into a tanker and go to a treatment plant. Whereas if you have regular chlorine, you can let that dissipate for 10 days and or 2 weeks, take a test, and then you can put that in the low point of your property.
Right.
But places that with salt water were not allowing it because it was forever chemicals going into their harbors and into their ponds that was disrupting endocrine system on all the plants and animals and things. And so, and you look on Nantucket and we have some saltwater pools and we see no trucks driving around taking them. And so occasionally we'll get the town will get pictures. Hey, these guys are emptying the pool. Look at it, it's going down the road and look at this, it's going into the wetland. What do we do? So I'm just wondering from while we're talking about sort of groundwater and septic and sewers and things, is that an input we should be worried about and be thinking about if we're gonna be discussing lowlands and wetlands and everything else?
What I would say, Matt, is first of all, you kind of framed the issues really well. There are regulations against dumping even your freshwater. I mean, it's just, there are rules against doing things. It doesn't mean people don't do it. So the challenge isn't really, do the regs allow, the regs don't allow it. For saltwater pool, freshwater pool, the regs generally don't allow it with certain allowances made in there for small property owners, smaller volumes. The problem becomes enforcement. And this is the challenge I've heard is communities just have so many other things to enforce. And so they don't have the ability to go out and have a police group that just goes around watching for people who are dumping this one.
Yeah.
It's a function of how much bandwidth you have, what you can actually take the time to spend time enforcement. It's really good to have the conversation you're having, Matt, which is make sure people that watch meetings understand that they're not supposed to do that. You got to do some education. You should have Board of Health and maybe your natural resource group should be focused on education for that. But can you police it? I don't know. Probably tricky.
Well,
I think that
I'm not even at that level. I'm at the.
Don't allow them in the first place.
Yeah, well, some of these places we shouldn't be building them. We probably shouldn't be building them in wetlands or in at-risk areas are gonna erode and go away.
Yeah.
So that's probably pretty low-hanging fruit. But then also I'm just looking at it from is it something we should be thinking about as we're discussing some of the other things? That's all. I'm just putting it out there.
I think a lot of it is education. And a lot of people probably think, what's the big deal if I put my pool up to down the street, just gonna go in the drain and out to the ocean. It's salt water, it's gonna go to salt water, who cares? So it is a big educational step. I mean, David's been fighting this battle with fog and people throwing wipes, flushing wipes down. I mean, I still go to the grocery store and see flushable wipes. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. They're still calling them flushable wipes. You know, so it is a lot of education. But telling someone they can't out of a pool. I don't know, that's a tough one too.
We do have one more slide.
Yep, one more to go.
Madam Chair, just for Matt's, the Board of Health did issue new pool regulations about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I think the issue again is enforcement
What triggered, I think they're changing their
and
rules.
education. I'm not sure we did any education on the subject.
That's high, the education side, we had someone pump their pool down Fair Street one day, and all of Main Street smelled like bleach. So it wasn't, someone just something they could do, and I think that's about when the Board of Health was able to change that rule. In 17 years, I think I've seen 4 tanker trucks show up at our facility, pump up a pool.
And we know there's more than 4 pools.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, might have been the same guy.
All right, this is our last slide. So this is addressing some of the comments, the questions about build out. So just want to clarify, so on Somerset, the sewer capacity analysis we did, we've got a proposed 470 dwellings. So this was done with a max lot subdivision under current zoning. And we had 1 additional dwelling per subdivided property. And then we increased the multi-dwelling lots from 41% to 50%. This was done with Andrew Forrest in planning back at the sewer master plan in 2020, then we've been updating it as we move along. So just for terminology purposes, when we did the master plan, so 470 dwellings, a dwelling basically was similar to a house, so probably a building, a home. In the build out study that was done for the planning department, that did maximum build out for the entire island. So under that, a dwelling was basically anything that you had a bedroom or a kitchen, things like that. So that included tertiary apartments. So if someone converted their house and put an apartment in the basement, that added a dwelling. You put a garage apartment over your garage, that added a dwelling. So you get a much higher dwelling count. And again, so for that study, it was done, again, a theoretical exercise, not a realistic exercise. So you have a maximum subdivision lot under current zoning and then maximum dwellings per property. It was done on, like I said, island wise by zoning. So we looked at zoning, not individual lots, not, neighborhoods or anything, but island wide. And I'll give you an example. So in Somerset, Finback Lane is a perfect example of what we're talking about on theoretical numbers. So this is an R20 zoning area. By zoning, you're allowed to have 3 dwellings. So we have 45 dwellings counted for that area. As you can see, there's no way they're building more properties or more units there. They could take, unless there's restrictions on deed restrictions, maybe they could put a basement apartment in one of these houses. That's going to reduce from 5 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms and add 1 bedroom in the basement. You still have 5 bedrooms. So while you're adding dwellings in the count, you're not really going to expand anything, and you're not going to be building more buildings on those lots. They're maxed out. But the build out study does not look at this level. Like I said, it just looks at overall the entire island wide each zoning district. It doesn't do a real lot by lot. In the master plan, we sat down, we did a lot by lot. Maybe you were there with David and Andrew. We went through all the different lots and kind of said, okay, what does this make sense? So, we did not count 45 bedrooms or 45 lots of dwellings here. We have 15 dwellings and that's it. You're not going to get any more flow out of that area. So that's something I take a grain of salt when you look at that 880 number. Because just by one street, that number 880 is down to, take away 30 lots, you're down to 850. That's if everybody maxed out every single possible.
It
development.
wasn't Finback, bonus lots, wasn't it
It's like a cluster development.
it's a
Yeah.
cluster with
Yep.
bonus lots, so it was a cluster that could have, if it has 15, it probably had 9. And then they clustered, so that's an example of something that actually has more houses on it than it would have had, I think, under.
If you look on the outside of it, all the open space they have.
No, I understand, but if you look at that, I'm not sure that this is a great example of, and I know the point you're trying to make, but I think that when the subdivision like this, I don't think is allowed. You're allowed extra housing and extra ground cover if you put X amount of green space aside.
Dedicated.
And so something that had, 10 houses can now have 12 or 14. So, so this was actually, so if we had counted it back in the day, we would have said it had 12 houses. I'm getting the numbers wrong.
No, I get.
And now we're saying, oh, now it has 15, so it's not gonna have any more. Well, it still has 3 more than we counted it having 15 years ago. That's,
But
No,
the point is, if I can interpret what you're saying, is there will be lots that have more potential than is in the 880 and lots that have less potential because of what exists already.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just trying to caution you on the max build out of the island numbers. Because like, like Odin the golf course, it's a private golf course. Their max build out is they build out houses to the maximum extent. You have an enormous number of homes that could be built out there on that property. Is that really gonna happen? Not in our lifetime, I don't.
that's a
can't imagine.
better example. That's a good example.
But-
compared to this.
But I'm just showing you that just to be cautious with those max build out numbers, because the max build out for that area, just because it's not done by lot by lot. If we did lot by lot, we wouldn't add those in here. But we didn't have the ability to go down and drill in that report island wide. It was just done by area. So that's all it is. It's just a caution for you folks to
On the
take
four-
those numbers with a grain of salt.
on the 470 dwellings, is that, how many lots is that? Is that? How many, how many, like approximate, is that 470
With
lots or is that
Proposed and existing, is that 454 number?
proposed build out 470?
Yeah,
How many, approximately how many lots do you think that is?
315, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, 315, okay.
Lots total.
Yeah, so dividing the 880 by 3, because that's the maximum, you're getting back.
No, we didn't do the 880s at all. That was done outside.
Outside of it, but.
We looked at
yeah.
we went through lot by lot and looked at if you maximize the zoning build out. By lots, and then how many realistically homes are gonna go there? Is every person gonna put three houses on that lot?
Well, Don can answer that one better
Sure,
than me. When the Islander homes are bought out, what are we gonna see there? Out in that area. That's,
They have a community septic system, which is very impactful. That's what that.
oh, these
green
guys
spot
do,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Open back.
No, I'm talking about Somerset. What happened, when Way Street,
All sewer.
yeah, if we're Seward, what's gonna happen in Somerset? 2 houses, 2.5 houses a lot, it's
I mean,
main house, pool
I'd
house.
say probably just bigger houses, maybe bigger houses, maybe a guest house or garage apartment and probably play a pool.
Yeah,
It's very individualized as to what you want in your home and your neighborhood. I mean, some people may want to just have their one home and nothing around it. Other people may want to maximize and put 3 in.
no, I think, yeah, we're, how do I say it? The homes that are year rounders are living in now in that area and they've been there for
Yeah.
30 and 40 years. Will most likely be gentrified and most likely will be replaced and it will be what the market wants. That's, I think, what Don is saying, pretty,
The land is worth too.
yeah.
It's not. Unless it's restricted, it's not gonna hurt us.
But going back, Matt, to one of your earlier questions, you talked about what can be done. And I do remember Andrew talking to the folks in Nantucket, basically saying, you guys can change the zoning if you want it. To change the zoning in your neighborhood and put it up to town meeting, to change it and restrict it. So that's a question for the townsfolk. So what do you want to do with these areas? I mean,
And a lot of Nantucket did switch to VR, village residential, which is more limited.
And they have got a strong, a strong community association and a lot of active members and, and it took a lot of work even for them to get that, so.
This may be kind of granular, but in this case on Finback, sewer comes, everyone gets on sewer, what happens to the existing community septic in there? Does their HOA pay to decommission it or?
Yeah, we would have to abandon that, we have to fill it in and abandon it.
I don't know if there's other questions, but I'm just going back to the board's most recent discussion about this on December 17th. And the items that came up at that meeting, which I think maybe have more or less been answered here. We had some discussion about 77 Bartlett property, and the discussion was if we don't do the project right away or try to phase it, what could we do there? So we heard about the septic, can't really, that sounds not really very feasible.
Right.
To put a new septic system in with because it would have to come out. And that we did have a little internal discussion about, could we do some sort of sewer extension to the sewer force main that's down the road? I don't know if I ever got a final answer on it, but I maybe you can address it, David. I thought that would be a spaghetti line type of situation, which we don't typically like to do with anybody. And I don't know if we'd want to do that ourselves, but I think that also would be shut down if when the project proceeds. We talked a little bit about, could we connect to sewer on some sort of adjacent property, but that I think ran into, is that sewer sized for that type of flow? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think, and also just the easement issues, I think were sort of daunting. That made us not really look so much at using those units and what might it save us in rental costs overall, because maybe we could rent less units for town employees if we had these, but that all revolves around having a functioning septic system. We talked about the sewer capacity fee and coming up with some examples of different properties and what their fees would look like under what we reviewed, so that's been provided. The environmental impacts of sewer came up, and that was the benefits, removal of nitrogen from a needs area versus if sewer is installed. But if there's more development, what does that impact look like? Impervious services, more houses, like what you were talking about, Matt. And I wasn't quite sure how to get at that, but I think that's been somewhat addressed here. And phasing the project came up. What does that look like cost wise, timing wise, disruption wise, SRF wise? And I think that's been explored and not really recommended. So I don't know if the board has other information needs to make a determination about whether or not to proceed with Somerset at the 2026 annual town meeting. And I don't think you have to decide that right this second, but that is gonna need to be known soonish. Like in the next, like by the 21st.
Touch a little bit, Libby, on the spaghetti line that you're talking. It would be part of the existing extension that's there. I've already gotten a cost from Weston on what it would approximately cost. Once we go through with the gravity and the force main does, the sewer project goes forward, all the lots that are connected to that spaghetti or extension line would end up being converted to gravity. We leave stubs at every single lot as we went by, as we do with every project that we do now. The easement issue was that it became quite complicated, and you mentioned going over the Marble Way. The one that's on Butler Road could be an option to go, and I've spoken with Dan and them today about that.
With who?
Dan and Kent
Oh.
from Weston, and so there is an option if we ever go that way. It's just.
It did sound a little like there's an expense to that, and it would be sort of wasted because we wouldn't really be able to use it after.
Yeah, how much they connect to the marble, to the fourth main that's there right now, in the extension?
Talking with you guys, about $265,000. We have the pumps and the tanks and that.
Yeah.
But
So it would be a little bit less.
Be a little bit less, and if the town could do the work, which
that would be something not long-term, right?
A few years.
Until the sewer's in, yeah.
And then we would decommission that and.
Decommission that.
Correct.
you don't think you'll see the first oil flush for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
I looked at the distance going to, in front of 69 Bartlett versus going to Marble Way is very similar lengthwise. So if you wanted to do it, I would go with David's recommendation and go up part of the road. I wouldn't try to deal with the easement. Cause you don't wanna pay easement fees to a homeowner for something that's temporary. And it's not gonna save you any money by going that direction.
That should probably cost more, wouldn't it? With the fee for the easement.
Yeah, about just construction.
Yeah, yeah.
Very similar ones, so.
Why is it failed? What's the failure on that septic? What's wrong with it?
It's a hydraulic failure, it needs to be.
Many years of flooding.
It's getting-
Flooding, so it's water and it's, yeah.
Yeah,
The fields are probably shot.
it's not drained.
Could you mound it and do it again and reuse it? Or no?
Not where, that's where the pump station.
Not where it is, cause it pumps going.
Either way, either option's a temporary solution.
Well, and we'd be building something, ripping it out while we're constructing the pump station, so we don't really get as much time out of it anyway. It's not like we can use it up until the
Right,
point in time that the pump station's complete and then decommission it. We lose that whole construction period too, so
yeah.
I think we just say, yep, we're gonna have some housing down the road.
It might give, I don't think we explored this too much, it might give an opportunity to determine if either of the houses could be moved.
So would it be better to move up to
Yeah.
like start to hillside or something?
I don't know. If
We
could
do
explore
think
that.
there's an advantage from the project side of moving at least the front home. Just because the site's really tight for the pump station and all the things we have to fit on there. We need a gen set, we need a fuel tank. We need to treat stormwater on the site. It would be beneficial from our opinion if we could move maybe the front property, at least front building.
It doesn't have a full basement, right? So we could move it and put it on a full basement. With more bedrooms.
Let's put it right next to the pond. Bring it to Nantucket, right in the.
There's no fees if you put it in the plan.
Yep,
Yeah, David has housing on the site at the treatment facility already.
Which is going to depend a little bit on whether or not the island home proceeds, because there's housing that would go there from
yeah,
Sherburne.
well, we'll know that.
Yeah, but I mean, we could move that house to one of the lots on Tacoma.
I know it's
Yeah.
the trust lot, but what about 14 Somerset?
Hmm.
Not that far.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's an easy move.
Yeah.
Something to consider.
You'd have to-
No, oh, no, I'm thinking, no, it's the opposite end.
Yeah,
What?
I said there's.
but we can explore potential move.
So we got it.
Right, because it's affordable housing.
No, because that's where the funding is from, sewer funding. It's sewer funding, so it has to be offered to sewer first.
Oh.
And then if they don't, then anybody, we could conceptually put anybody in it, but that does kind of much like hillside. It's so we can find it time to take it out.
Yeah.
I said, one thing I would like to see at the end of deciding to go forward with this, and we did it with Schimmel, which I thought was extremely beneficial. We had area neighborhood meetings. I met with Georgia Snell's one weekend with their neighborhood and everything. That was huge to get the education out there, that I think the Somerset area people and everyone else would really benefit. I mean, we had meetings in the summertime in Schimmel for that thing, and the education, like Dan had mentioned at one point in time, is just key. And now with everything else that's out there, with PFAS and everything else, to talk to these people, I wish we had talked to the select board when we did Schimmel, more so than what we're doing now.
I think there's pent up desire to have, I know, in fact, I've had at least two people who live in that neighborhood can say to me, are we getting sewer? Are we getting that? People are dying for it.
Yeah, they want it.
They want it. I mean, I know
Yeah.
one year-round family wants to build a covenant house for their son, and they can't until sewer comes in the neighborhood, so.
How do
Actually-
people think about water?
Huh?
Same thing, do they want water? I mean, because that's part of this, I just.
Yes.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah, so I don't think the neighborhood is gonna take issue with this. I think it's the tax, it's,
It's the overall cost.
yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
I think, gonna be a big hurdle.
Well, and
Capital
if
request.
it becomes gentrified completely, then people will say, why did you do that? We've lost all these year-round homes.
Yeah.
You know, that it's, and the worry that that's gonna happen is gonna be a big topic with some. So,
That's a conversation I wanna have with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because it's the next one that we need to find out, what are people willing? Are people willing to accept, as I described before, some kind of development middle ground versus what they would be allowed if we didn't change anything?
And I think High Valley's a really good example.
Yeah.
How to utilize.
So,
So do you all think you have enough information to be properly informed enough to make a decision about this project at your meeting on the 21st? Does it
Yeah.
need to be a warrant article and a ballot question?
I do, it's really just about where we all are with the context of other capital projects, I think is the more. The next layer of this discussion. Which is not agenda today, so we'll do it on Wednesday.
For me, it was I think this was a great session. I'm glad we had it. It answered a lot of questions for me.
It is nice to do the workshop type thing, where we're just talking about one issue.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Measure, you know, like, I'm gonna do the last two.
Yeah, thank you.
Second.
I'll do roll, I'll be online. All those in favor by roll call, Malcolm McNabb.
Yes, I.
Okay.
Tom Dixon.
Aye.
Brooke Moore.
Aye.
No, we are adjourned.
Right.
Yeah, see, I wasn't ready to.
Bad.